Welcome to Frequently Speaking. This is your host, Max Wellness. Now, here on this podcast, we're going to start to break down words that we speak outwardly and how their vibrations create what we frequently see. Now, in today's episode, we're going to delve into L.E.G.O, limiting the energy gathered outside. Welcome to another episode of Frequently Speaking. You already know who it is. This is Max Well. Now today, I wanted to bring in an episode that was a topic that was really prevalent with a lot of people in dealing with the ego. Now, whether you know what the ego is, if you've identified it, or just have no knowledge of it, this episode is going to be diving into how not to piss off or hurt your own ego. We're going to start to look at the different ways of how we perceive the ego death and how we perceive the finite and the infinite. We're going to bridge that gap in between our divine self and this limited human experience. We're going to look at how to dissolve the limiting ego without killing it to create an abundant, integrative relationship of wholeness. Now, through this episode, we're going to dive into different things about how the ego pops up in our trying. We're going to look at how it comes through criticism, laziness, anxiety, and many other things. And we're also going to focus on how these energies really actually gather up and how we start to take account for them. And by taking account, I say, how do we attach to them? How do we humanly receive them and say, okay, this part is me? We're also going to look at how that attachment starts to bring limitedness to us and how we can leverage our divinity into that side of that ego or that human, so that we can look at how our human and our divinity comes into play in this human experience in a holistic way. And stay tuned at the end of the episode where I'm going to share a practical practice of what you can actually bring into your life for a short 20-minute way of implementing this ego separation and bringing in a holistic practice of yourself as well as the ego and ushering you into unlimitedness. So sit back, take a relax, and let's start building this L.E.G.O. So I wanted to really bring about this episode in a sense of our ego, right? We all have issues with the ego, and that's okay. That's what it's there to do. It's there to give us an understanding of this human experience. And a lot of times we always hear that the ego is such a bad thing. And, the ego is coming in to stop us from doing this. And it's creating this self-sabotaging identity that we have. And we're never able to get things done. And all of these different things. I feel personally that the ego has such a bad rap. And I'm going to share later on my personal story with integrating the ego. But so what I really wanted to do is come back to where that ego actually was birthed. Where was it created? Where was it built? And what this really brought me to was a state of our inner child. Now, we can surely build up our own self like a creative 6-year-old in their room with the plethora of Legos that are looming to cause grown-up feet implicit pain in their near future. It can also be a painful building of our self up in so many ways of our ego and our spirit. But I ask you these questions. Which one do we listen to? Who's who? How do I know what's right and wrong? And who am I to judge? With these questions building up, there can only seem like one solution. My ego has it out to get me, so it must die. Ego death, ego death, ego death. But there's one specific thing that we really lose along that line. We forget that the ego is a part of us, though. It's an essential part of our identity. And if you are on a perpetual hunt for this part of you, you'll consistently be at war within and creating death in your vessel. So now let's look at that for a second. As we come into this world, we're like a little child. We're quite literally a little child, but spiritually, I mean. We come into the world so pure, and it's like we're given all these Legos, all of these different possibilities, all of these different shapes and sizes, and we have our will, we have our higher faculties, we have so many things that we're learning how to play and build and break down and do all these different things. But really what starts to create that separation between the ego and the divinity is that it's the conditioning from outside, the things that start to tell us what to judge, what is right and what is wrong. Because what is right and what is wrong is where we come into this limited physical reality. We start to learn what's right, what's correct, how to eat our food right, how to cross the street correctly, how to put our socks on correctly. And this is where we start to build the ego, because the ego has to live here in the physical. That divinity is what comes into the world in purity. It's free of judgment. It's free of right and wrong. It doesn't adhere to an identity. And this answers all those questions that we have. Because as we're continuously looking at that aspect and we want to come back to that center and come back to that divinity, we start to say, okay, well, the only way to get through that is to kill this ego part. I must get rid of this person. And we don't really realize that that person is you. We start to not see that this ego is another aspect of you. So really, essentially, we're at war with ourselves. You're trying to kill a part of yourself. So imagine if you were living in a house with another version of you. And all day, every day, you're nagging on it, telling it how it's so unhelpful and how it's so lazy and how it's so procrastinating, how it's wrong and it's all its fault and all of these things. How would that person feel? Of course, that person would be against you. Of course, there would be tension in the house. Of course, there would be friction. So why would we want to create that within ourselves if we're looking to create this union between the two? Now I ask you the question, when do we ever stop to listen and learn this ego side? So there's a quote that I feel is very resonant that came through with this piece, and it really gave me an insight to the human experience and this divine experience of what is in comparison to what's created. Suffering is in self-creation, for we are the marble and the sculptor. When we take this position in our life, we can see how we are the little 6-year-old that is building with the Legos. And we are also the thing that is built by the Legos and then broken down and then built again and then broken down by every decision and by every wave of creative emotion that is meant to be built. But the thing about the building and the big thing about the sculpting is that there is suffering in that, because that suffering comes with the letting go. So now that we can have this perspective, I want to look into the finite a little bit more and see how we actually got brought there by filtering into the finite. Now, if you agree that you are energetic by nature and that you are a spiritual being having a human experience, you must also agree that the ego is also an energetic entity and part of this human being experiencing the spirit. They're one and the same. One is energy gathered from within, one is energy gathered from outside. Sometimes we may feel that the physical, egoic, and human world may be finite, which implies limits. But that is the relationship with the infinite. So let's look a bit deeper into how this finite nature can be filtered in its limiting nature and how we can let go of this restriction and open ourselves to infinite integration of wholeness. And I mean to say that by when we look at the separation of these two sides, just as the yin and yang, you see the black and you see the white. They both have their own indistinct names, but they're always in that circle. They're always in that wholeness. It's the same thing with the energy gathered from within and the energy gathered from outside. It's this play between heaven and earth and this communing in the middle into the heart space. And really what we have to do is to see and to actually become infinite. We have to really look at that same separation in the wholeness of that word infinite and see that we are finite. We are in that state of being finite. But the fact is that as we're having this human experience, and this is where our perspective is, we have to let go of those restrictions. We have to open ourselves to that infinite integration. This is how we begin to see the wholeness. And this is not a spiritual bypassing and stepping away from the human and all these good things. It's not that. It's respecting that filter of where we came from, being a divine spirit, having this human experience. Now, when we feel this ego energy that may be limiting, what are we really feeling? We are feeling the restriction of the infinite self that is present. It can be a reaction to want and to experience an ego death, but with death comes grief. Knowing what we know about death, grief, and the ego, how do you think the ego would respond to someone living in the same vessel that's actively trying to kill it when it knows that it can't die? You now have this seemingly finite being being killed consistently, looking at as the one that doesn't belong and completely being rejected each and every day, unable to process the hundreds of deaths and life attempts on its natural existence. How would the ego actually feel? How would you actually feel? Because it is you. You have this consistent process of somebody killing you, telling you that you're wrong, telling you that you're not enough, or you're taking us in the wrong direction, or you don't know where you're going, or you're too egoistic, you're too much, you're too this, you're all of these different things. And with that metaphysical and energetic, it's very metaphorical in a way, the death of the ego, because they're both infinite, they're both infinite, so they both can't die. But yet we're consistently killing this ego energetically. How does it process that grief? How does it process that shame, that guilt? And if we denounce and say that the ego doesn't experience that, then we're denouncing it as an energetic being and a part of the spiritual and a part of God, because God did create it, so it's a part of this God. Now its very natural existence is denied, rejected, and we live with that inside the vessel. We are creating grief. We are creating death within the body. So how does that get processed? How do you think it would handle that? It's an entity, synonymous with eternity. And because it's gathered from outside, it needs to naturally express outside. When that grief and nature can't be expressed, it gets repressed. And I'm sure we all know what repression feels like, looks like, and can become over time. So how do we create a healthy environment for this entity, whilst also allowing ourselves to guide us in joy, love, and light, and all the good things? We integrate. We integrate the two and really understanding, okay, this grief is here. Now, how do I forgive? How do I look at this person, and rather than trying to kill you, how do I look at all the good things that are in you and see how we are in this together and make this home a lighter place, a more loving place, a more joyous place for us both to live? You look at the union, you look at the comparison, but now we have to see, where does the ego try and attempt all of these things? So let's look into targeting the trying. What is actual trying? Now, I have my own perspective of what trying is, and it's more of like a motivational and inspirational thing that I get to really kick myself into gear to get things done. And I've found it as my leverage point, which is something I want to share with you guys a little bit later in this practical practice. But for me, trying is acting with an intention to fail. Now, I say that not to say that I'm sabotaging myself, but I say that if I'm acting with an intention that is not aligned with doing, then I'm already welcoming failure in. And I know that we all have different perspectives onto what trying is. Maybe we may see it as efforting, maybe we may see it as giving it all you got, whatever it is. But when we look at the ego and its ability to try, it can come up in so many other ways. And I know that trying sometimes can be a way of attempting, and it sounds easy enough, but when we actually are doing it, it can be quite daunting when it starts to show up as criticism, laziness, lack, recognition, control, anxiety, judgment, expectation, and so many more. Now, these aspects and these characteristics that start to pop up, these are kind of like those shadow aspects, and this is a part of that energy that's gathered outside. Because sometimes anxiety, control, recognition, these things don't necessarily come from our true divine self. I don't believe that they actually do, but let's take, for example, this energy that we gather from outside. You may be around a bunch of people that are not really motivated, they're not really, let's say, driven, or maybe they're just really high strung, or they're always talking about other people or other situations. So this can start to become this energy that we gather from outside. It becomes that judgment where people are always consistently talking about other things and other situations outside of them, judging it as right or wrong. Or you may gather that energy of procrastination and that lack of drive, and that comes up as laziness within you. Or you start to see these high strung people, whether if it's in your job or on the subway, whatever it may be, we gather that energy outside as anxiety. So now this energy is just projecting itself through you, and that becomes what we perceive as the ego. Those are the things that we want to stop because we're trying not to do those things. Now, those lists of characteristics that I just went through, these become our targets of interest that we set out to hunt down and turn in on ourselves to rid our human nature of it all. These are those aspects that we start to label as the ego. What if we could tap into the true infinite nature of our spirit and instead continuously trying to be accepting, loving, and whole, we express that from that state already. By this, what I mean is we're looking at it from being at that state of infiniteness. We're looking at that state and we're observing the ego. And in expressing those traits by embodying them and being that for our ego, we are giving it full acceptance of the criticism, loving its laziness, and recognizing the wholeness of it all just by letting go. We're limiting that ego in that process of observing it. That is when we're gathering that energy outside, and that energy comes up as anxiety, frustration, or judgment, or any of those things. That is the thing that limits the energy that's outside. That is what we need to let go. So this actually posed another question. What would soon alchemize from that energy gathered outside being inspirited or inspired? It brought to mind another quote. Having reverence for the ego comes with full acceptance of the ego. Because how can we truly revere something that is here and really give it that honor that it truly deserves without fully accepting all the parts of it? Because acceptance is love. Acceptance is the heart. It's seeing all the different aspects of it, the shadow, the light, the good, the bad, the whole judgment, and stepping back and seeing the whole and accepting it for all of it. Well, I'll tell you what could be possible. We would begin to become exactly the limitless being we are seeking to be. By seeking something that which we already are in nature, we create the very limits that we point at our counterpart, the ego. We are creators by nature, so what we fix our focus on, we soon create. In this instance, we create the limits and place the blame on the ego for its finite nature. We begin to blame it for its actual true existence, judging it. This, I believe, causes the separation. This, I believe, causes that war mentality. We're forever seeing it as the thing that keeps us imprisoned and finite. There's no part of you that is against you. Only the thoughts that we begin to create from our own limiting belief that you're sabotaging yourself. You are the ego. You are the spirit. You are the finite and the infinite. Can you accept this wholly? In looking at this in a holistic manner, right? Imagine yourself sitting down at a restaurant and you order a bunch of food. There's some things you like, some things you don't like. You eat some things, you leave some things. But at the end of the night, you still have your account. You still have your bill. Now, if you don't really pay for that bill, if you don't have the funds to pay for the things that you ate and pay for the things that you didn't eat, how do you have accountability? So I want to look at this in a way of, if you were given the ego and you were given this divinity and you were brought here into this world, which is the restaurant, how are you taking account of the gathering? How are you taking account of the energy that's gathered outside? Yeah, sure, we're all and nothing. But how do we stop ourselves when we have those thoughts creeping in, telling us to hit that snooze button one more time? Make sure you have it all under control, or else it'll all go to shit. Or that the reason why you haven't completed that project is because you just can't. The expectation for the outcome of every situation, relationship, and conversation to go your way is control. When we take account for the energies we have outside and around us that we are gathering, that create our finite world, our ego lives in, we begin to filter through those expressions of familiarity around gathered energy from our past experience, current beliefs, and limitations going forward that can help us to integrate the ego without the death, the grief, and the rejection of the finite aspect of all that is you. To be infinite is to be infinite. It is a gathering of both and an integration of both. It is an acceptance of both. Remember, you are both in this world and of this world. That's simply my perspective. I know that's not necessarily how the quote goes, but that is my perspective in a holistic aspect. For me, the letting go is really looking at these two aspects of where this really derived from. It was really looking at the energy that was gathered outside and also how those things limited me. I started to begin to look at the ways in which my ego showed up in cases when I was younger. When I would go out and, party, promote, and be with friends and, do all these things and created this identity, right? And what I soon learned to see is that my divinity took a back seat. There was this illusion that I was moving in that direction because this felt true. It felt like I was building this, this Lego creation with all these bricks and these, the experiences were my bricks and the parties were my bricks and all of these different things. But there came a time where I had to let go. And it was like, we have to really take accountability for that energy. But it's how we take that accountability and looking at, we gathered this energy because we were drawn to it. We created it. I built this whole castle, and then now I want to take it down. But I want to appreciate it. I want to thank every block for being there, because it gave me this opportunity to see the whole as of what it built. And now when we can look back at it, this is how we can integrate the ego. Are we going to smash that whole, castle or that whole robot and then be upset and then build another one? Or maybe we let the world do it. Because sometimes situations come up in our life where you may have a person or a situation or maybe a car accident or a death or a partner just tear down who you actually truly were, or who you thought you were, from that energy that was gathered outside. Now, a lot of times for me, what really came up was criticism and laziness. I would always look at my lack of movement and my, let's say, what I would perceive as flaws, but now what I see is humanness, for mistakes or for shortcomings, whatever it may be. And I would take that and criticize and say, okay, like it's not good enough. You need to do this. Oh, okay, you can do better. Okay, that's not right. Okay, this. And then also, like with the laziness, it's like, okay, well, if you're not moving forward, or you see people from outside and I gather that energy outside, it's okay, well, you're not that, you're not that, you're not that. And coming to realize that that is the ego speaking, and that is the ego that is that filtering in the finite. But it's up to us to clean our filter continuously. And I say clean it by looking at different practices, looking at meditations, looking at body movement, looking at plant medicines, ancestral teachings. A lot of these things bring into that count of how you can make letting go easier, how you can make it more lovable, how you can make it more accepting of the both, rather than saying, you know what, I'm so critical, I'm so judgmental, I'm so anxious, I'm so that, and you affirm those things, or you tell that to another person. Oh, you're so judgmental. Oh, you're so critical. Oh, you need to pay more. All these different things, that is the energy that's outside. But if we can take account and see that energy, then what it brings us to do is it starts to bring us into our strengths, and it starts to bring us into that perspective of what we truly are in that divinity. And this is our limitlessness. So I want to step into how we can leverage the limitlessness. So some familiarities we can come to notice and integrate within our wholeness are the ways our environments speak to us. We do this to see where we can leverage these limitations with our strengths to let go of the energy gathered outside that can limit our creations. We start to see the ways that scale is imbalanced, and rather than just smacking all the things off the one side because it's so terrible and then the other side drops down, that doesn't necessarily help anybody. And it doesn't necessarily accept and allow this ego and really go through the process so that it doesn't happen again, so that we don't repeat the pattern again, because everything is balance. And it's going to swing you back into the opposite way if you create that same momentum. So what are some of the leveraging limitations that we can have to bring those strengths over to the other side to really quell and let go of that energy gathered outside? So one way is looking at how we're supposed to be a certain way within our environmental settings. This really means the conditionings that are set within a dinner table, within a specific party, within a specific work environment. All of these different environmental settings start to become that energy that's gathered outside. And a strength can be, how am I supposed to be within this environmental setting? How am I supposed to be in this stressful environment? How am I supposed to be on this train? These are different ways how we can leverage that strength. Now, another way is also critical ways of judgment based on our own subjective beliefs. When we take our subjective beliefs. This is something that we have created. We have taken this thought and held it chronically to become a belief. And then what it is, we start to judge the world within that belief. We start to take the world and bring it into our frame. And we start to become critical of it. So if we can look at where those beliefs came from and shift them or adapt them, maybe they are serving you, maybe they aren't. But if they're bringing in judgment, then it means that it's something that is not 100% true. Another way is also experiencing different paced cultures with an understanding based in productivity, values, or status. So this means when we're looking at different cultures all throughout the world, cultures meaning how the quality and condition of a state of being actually is in a specific space. So when you go to, let's take, for example, when I went to Costa Rica. I went to Costa Rica and people lived very differently. The culture was very different. And now when I understood what it actually meant to be productive there, that shifted me because they were at a different pace of productivity. They were still producing, but they weren't necessarily producing like my Western mindset was. So I allowed that strength of what I had as productivity and moving fast and getting things done and being so proactive. That was something that I noticed that they didn't have there. So what I started doing was mending the two. Rather than slowing down so much and, taking things super, super easy, I learned a way to mend both so that I could start to value that more and learn a different way of productivity. So I leveraged that strength to let go of that ego of being pushed by a certain thing and learned how to slow my pace a little bit more. Now, another leveraging aspect is also knowing all the workings of each situation with the thought that things need to be managed. This is all about control. When we want to know everything, manage each situation, and we bring in that thought process, we are in a state of ego that is trying to control. If I know every aspect, then I can control the outcome. This is a solution-based mentality. This is thinking rather than thought. This is the process of the ego. So how we can leverage that is rather than being in a process of knowing, we can attain knowledge. I can attain this information and disperse it and delegate it out thoroughly so that in each of the situations I have knowledge of it, but I'm still also open to the unknown or the impossible, free of knowing what the outcome actually is. Now, the last one I want to share with you is actually seeing the layers of limitless abundance and how things can naturally come to you without the need of validation. Now, a strength in this is really coming down and sitting with yourself and looking at the limitlessness that you actually are. When we truly see and tap into our own divinity and say, this divine self is with this energy that I gathered from outside, there is a abundant nature that this energy is coming through me and also through that. It is coming from the heavens also into the earth. And that is the state of abundance. It is continuously giving. And I don't need to step out of that to go into that energy that is gathered outside and reverse that flow of effect. It's kind of like being that salmon that's swimming upstream. When we release and let go that sense of validation and we validate ourselves in knowing, then we enter into that true limitless state of divine abundance. I feel like shifting these familiarities requires a L.E.G.O. When we let go of our familiar intent, let go of our limiting belief systems, we soon begin inspirited with the integration of the ego. We allow for a wholeness to naturally come to be, free of limits and living infinitely. We build with this new foundation of Legos for a limitless ego. So I really look at this in a sense of, yes, there's a play on words, and we can shift that L from limiting to limitless just by simply letting go. Letting go of the energy that is gathered outside when we take that into our own personal life or into a relational life. In an aspect or a frame of a relation, when somebody's approaching you and they may have some level of judgment, or they may have some high strung anxiety that you feel like you're absorbing, and you start to judge that, or you start to become anxious, and this disturbs you from your divine centeredness. But to be able to let that go is to also see your strengths. So I urge you to look at the different strengths that you have, see those as the bricks that you have been building, those Legos that you have been building your creation with, and tap into that inner child, that pure divine seed that came here, so that you can see how you can shift that limiting energy gathered outside to a limitless energy that's gathered outside. So with all that being said, how do we actually ground this? I want to share a practical practice with you that I take into some of my sessions as well as my daily practice when I find myself being really consumed by this energy that's gathered outside, especially here when I'm in New York. I can definitely say it's been a challenge navigating the anxieties of the train, the rushing, the hustling, bustling, the environment, all the different things. But this practice has really helped me, and it's also supported a lot of other people. Now, if you are looking to build a better relationship with the ego rather than consistently killing it, we need to look towards unraveling the resistance. So let's take time within your day, and maybe say 20 minutes, to actively pinpoint where you may be gathering energies from outside that are creating resistance within. So let's start by asking yourself, both of them, these questions. What do you expect from others, your life, and your goals? With this question, it really brings about how to dissolve and dispel the expectations that you actually hold. Not necessarily consciously and out front, but it brings you into a more subtle level of those subtle expectations that you may be having around real life things that you are functioning on the outside way. The second question is, where am I criticizing critically, and how can I observe objectively? This goes to say, how close are we looking at things? And when can we actually step back and observe from that divine self? When we're so close up on things, we start to see it for the subjective manner that it is, rather than stepping back and looking at the object. The next question is, can I recognize where I'm seeking recognition? When we're looking for recognition, we're looking for the ego that is on the outside to be seen. We're looking for that reflection that is the mirror to be seen. But asking this question brings you to realize for yourself, have you actually seen the mirror that holds the reflection? Now the next question is, how am I limiting myself with the acting as if I am lacking? When we look at this, we're really stepping out, looking at that energy that is gathered outside and looking at our actions. We're looking at our actions in our daily life, in our process, in our reactions, in our responses. Are we coming from a lacking sense? Are we moving as if we do not have enough? Are we moving in a sense of survival? This is all showing the actions of the ego, and it starts to shed light on the physical doing that the ego is bringing you into. The next question is, why am I afraid of letting things go out of my control? What this question does is it invites us into the fear that is behind the powerlessness of control. We all have a sense of control at our core. because we do want to be in control. It is the mind. The mind needs to know, and that's its nature. But can we love it for that nature and detach from the my? Understanding and accepting that it is all in control. And if I step into that divinity, then I am in control. And I am detached from my control. Now, the last question I want to share with you in this practice is, what experiences am I holding on to that support my expectations I place on things around me? When we look at this, we're again dissolving that expectation, because the expectation is really connected to the ego. It is connected to the energy that we gather outside to set a standard as to what things are. So by asking this question, we start to look at where those expectations from that energy that was gathered outside came from with the experiences that we went through. Say, for example, we had an experience with our mother that told us we needed to be the best dresser or have the best hair, whatever it is. So that is an expectation that we set for ourselves. And I get it. There's an understanding that there's a set standard for yourself. You can have a standard, but when you start to place it on those things around you, that is being in the ego when you place it on the outside, because that energy was gathered from outside. So I give you these questions in a sense of taking them into journal prompts. You can take these into your daily meditation, whatever it may be, but this is more of an explorative thing to really see in a practical way of what your life is looking like in the ego. You're stepping into the external world, or that energy gathered outside, and really shining a light with this questioning to see and alchemize what is actually truth. Now, prompting yourself with these questions one at a time can provide you with answers to the ways in which you create resistance within, between yourself and ego. These answers are the building blocks to then begin to let go and shape a limitless integration with the energies around you. Take these new findings and begin to weave them into your life, and notice when the resistance presents itself and set up ways to overcome and choose different ways to approach them. So this is going to wrap up L.E.G.O, limiting energy gathered outside. If you would like more insight on how to bring these practices, these questions, and these struggles of integrating the ego and the self into a more grounded and consistent practice so that you build accountability and the unlimiting practices, schedule a call with me by clicking the link at the bottom or visiting my website. Always remember, your word is key, and keep speaking what you frequently see. If you like this episode and would like to explore more perspectives like this with me as we get a bit more intimate and intricate look into our internal vibrations, be sure to tune in to next week's episode and subscribe for more. Until then, keep frequently speaking what you frequently see.